You don't seem surprised, almost like you already knew Nancy was pregnant. Hey, Dad, you have an idea why, don't you?
When Steve heard Ryan's words, he let out a smug laugh and, without showing any guilt, continued talking.
The problem is, you started talking about leaving the house and not giving me any money, right? Nancy was kind to me. I think she liked me more than you, honestly.
Steve's nonchalant ramblings put Ryan on the edge of losing his temper.
So, when you're away on business trips, you leave Nancy lonely. Well, I had to step in and keep her company. The father of the child she's carrying is me. Sorry, but she came on to me first. Let's raise the kid together.
Steve's disgusting words made me feel like I was about to faint.
What? Are you kidding me?
Ryan said, and I stopped him from breaking his phone, as it looked like he was about to smash it. What followed was nothing short of chaos. How long do you plan to stay a child? You want a kid? Who's going to raise them? Stop wanting a child just to satisfy your desires. A child is a life, not your toy. I will protect my precious son, Ryan, and his wife, Nancy. Do you have anything to protect? Probably just your tiny, pathetic pride. If that's what you're protecting, why don't you hurry up and go to hell? I will never forgive you. My name is Olivia, and I'm a 43-year-old part-time homemaker. I have a son, Ryan, who I gave birth to when I was 20. I married my current husband, Steve, 6 years ago, when Ryan was 17. Ryan's father was an older man I met while I was in college. He was incredibly intelligent and passionate about research. When we found out I was pregnant, we planned to get married once he graduated and started working. However, he tragically passed away in a fatal accident overseas during his research trip. I gave birth to Ryan on my own and managed to raise him with the support of my parents. It was during this time that I met Steve. Steve was a regular at the cafe where I worked, coming in almost every day. I still remember how childlike he seemed, always ordering ginger ale as soon as he sat down. Seeing him daily, I gradually became interested in him. Despite his sharp features, Steve was incredibly talkative and always cracked jokes that made me laugh whenever I came by his table. He usually came with his friends, but sometimes he'd wait outside for me to finish my shift.
Olivia, you must be tired. Want to grab dinner together?
When he asked me out, we went on several dates. Ryan, who was in high school by then, often stayed late at tutoring, giving me some time to enjoy myself. As we spent more time together, I started thinking about the possibility of marrying Steve. After losing Ryan's father while still unmarried, I thought I'd never be able to marry anyone. But then Steve appeared in my life like an oasis, at a time when I was desperately focused on raising Ryan. Steve treated me, an older woman, like a lady, and I started to imagine sharing my life with him. Most importantly, Ryan took to Steve very well. At the time, Steve was still in his 20s, so Ryan probably saw him more like an older brother. Even so, Steve often took Ryan out and doted on him. So, when Steve proposed, although I hesitated, I decided to marry him, wanting to give Ryan a father. Ryan, who was intelligent and well-behaved like his late father, quickly started calling Steve Dad instead of Steve after we got married. Steve didn't seem to mind at all. In fact, he looked quite pleased and fired up.
From now on, I'm going to work even harder to support our family.
6 years have passed since I married Steve. Ryan graduated from college and started his career. I also quit the cafe job I had at the time and started working full-time when Ryan entered college. This morning, I was rushing to get ready for work since I had a meeting early in the day. As I was sipping coffee in the kitchen as a quick breakfast, Steve came. "Good morning. Do you want something to eat?" I spoke to Steve, who was sitting on the couch, but he shook his head. It seemed he didn't have an appetite. He had probably been drinking late last night again and was likely hungover. After finishing my coffee, I grabbed my bag and was about to leave the house. Then he spoke to me in a sleepy voice.
"Oh, I'm going out this evening. Can you give me some money?"
I sighed. Here we go again. If I didn't give him the money, he'd come all the way to my office to ask for it. So reluctantly, I left some cash on the table.
"Thanks."
Steve took the money and headed back to his bedroom. I watched him leave before stepping out the front door. Steve had quit his job right when I secured a full-time position. With Ryan starting college, I thought we needed more money, so I got a full-time job. However, when Steve quit his job, it felt completely counterproductive. I tried encouraging him several times to find work again, but it never seemed to get through to him.
"Why should I work when you're also working, Olivia?"
It felt like the determination he'd shown when we got married had disappeared. Though I was exasperated, I had always planned to send Ryan to college, even if I were single, so I convinced myself it was just like having one more dependent to support and work tirelessly. Part of me also believed that Steve would eventually find a job. However, Steve, who had always lived a flashy lifestyle even before our marriage, continued to borrow money from me and spend his nights out on the town. I didn't want Ryan, who was diligently focused on his studies, to worry, so I kept Steve's unemployment a secret for a while. But Ryan, being sharp and perceptive, quickly figured it out. Part of me believed that Steve would eventually find a job. Even so, Ryan never blamed Steve. Instead, he secretly set aside part of his part-time job earnings to give Steve pocket money. This went on for several years. Steve showed no signs of starting work anytime soon and just kept asking me for money like he did this morning. He mentioned going out this evening, so he was probably planning to go drinking again. Steve, who had many friends, never turned down an invitation. He dressed in brand-name clothes and accessorized with expensive items. That never changed, whether it was before or after we got married. When I came home from work that day, Steve was unusually in the living room. He was sitting on the couch, drinking alone. "Hey, didn't you go out?"
The guy I was supposed to drink with said something came up. Apparently, his kid got sick. I could have invited someone else, but hearing about a kid kind of killed my vibe, so I decided not to go.
He said that and sulkily downed his glass of alcohol in one gulp. That's too bad. I wonder if the person he was supposed to meet was a woman since they mentioned a kid. With that thought lingering, I just said a few words and headed to the kitchen. Steve placed his glass down and let out a big sigh.
Guess it's no surprise. You can't really expect kids with a woman over 40.
I reacted to his words.
Guys around my age all have kids. Man, I'd love to try raising a child too. I really want a child of my own. Why can't we have kids?
Steve spoke as if talking to himself, but loud enough for me to hear.
Ryan used to be cute, but now he's 23. He got a job at some fancy company and acts all cocky. He's lost all his charm. Sometimes he even looks at me like I'm trash or something. Honestly, I can't stand him.
When we got married, Steve had wanted kids of his own, and I was determined to fulfill his wish. Since I was approaching 40 at the time, I started fertility treatments and paid close attention to my daily habits. But even after 6 years of our marriage, we hadn't been blessed with a child. Steve sometimes made remarks like this when he was drunk, blaming me in a way. He had no idea how much those words cast a shadow over my heart each time.
Mom, do you have a minute? Oh, where's Dad?
One day when Ryan came home from work, he called me into the living room. Still in his suit, he looked sharp with his glasses on. Looking at him like this, he reminded me so much of his late father. He's out drinking again. He should be back soon, though. It was already past 11 p.m. If Steve didn't come home by this time, he'd likely stay out until morning. Lately, Steve has been coming and going from home inconsistently. He still hasn't started working and seems to go out into the nightlife almost every night.
Mom, are you okay? No matter what happens, I'm always on your side.
Ryan smiled warmly as he spoke, just like he always had. He has always been a reassuring presence, someone who protects me. And I've made a firm decision to protect Ryan, no matter what happens. At that moment, I heard the front door open. From the hallway came the sound of unsteady footsteps, and then the living room door opened.
Oh, it's Ryan. Hey, don't just work all the time. Have a drink or something. You're so boring.
Steve seemed to be in a good mood today. Occasionally, when Steve ran into Ryan in the living room, it led to arguments. He would always accuse Ryan of looking down on him, projecting his insecurities. Even though he had quit his job himself, he seemed to feel inferior to Ryan, who had landed a successful career.
Hi, Dad. Can I talk to you for a moment?
Ryan said, seating Steve on the couch. I sat down beside him. Ryan, with a serious expression, sat on a stool across the table and looked at us.
Dad, Mom, I've decided to move out. I'm planning to get married.
Ryan's sudden announcement left me unable to hide my surprise. Of course, it was a happy kind of surprise. Steve seemed at a loss for words as well. Really? Congratulations. Are you planning a wedding? I eagerly asked Ryan.
Well, we're thinking of registering the marriage first and then having a ceremony once my work settles down.
Ryan answered, looking a bit embarrassed. I had met Ryan's girlfriend a few times before. She had a graceful presence and was a wonderful, independent young woman. As I felt my heart swell with joy, Steve's face grew more serious.
Are you really moving out? What about me? You're still going to give me money like before, right?
I was shocked by Steve's response. I couldn't believe he was only worried about himself at a time like this. And I had no idea Ryan had been giving Steve money.
Dad, when I get married, I'll be leaving this house. I'll have my own family, so I can't keep giving you money like I used to. If you need money, You should get a job. You're only 35, Dad. There are plenty of jobs out there.
Ryan said what I'd always wanted to, but couldn't bring myself to say. I was sure he knew this would infuriate Steve, yet he still chose to speak up. As expected, Steve exploded in anger.
There you go again, looking down on me. I don't care about your marriage or whatever. You're not moving out, and you're going to keep giving me money like before.
Steve yelled and started throwing a tantrum. Since he had been drinking, he fell asleep soon after his outburst. Ryan carried Steve to the bedroom and then came back to the living room.
What a troublesome dad.
He said with a smile toward me. Ryan, congratulations on your engagement, I said to him once again. Despite Steve's strong opposition to Ryan's marriage, he seemed to have had a change of heart. Over the weekend, Ryan brought his partner, Nancy, to our house. I had met her a few times before, but she appeared even more mature and carried an even more graceful aura than before.
My name is Nancy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Her manners were impeccable. Her makeup was modest, yet her skin was flawless, her hair shiny, and she was undeniably beautiful. Steve, who usually lounged around the house in sweats, darted to his room the moment he saw Nancy. He dressed to the nines, complete with a styled haircut, as if he were heading out for a night on the town. Though Nancy seemed quiet at first, she was full of conversation, and we never ran out of things to talk about. Steve was clearly very taken with her. Even after Nancy left, he asked Ryan to bring her over again soon. I was relieved to see that Ryan's marriage seemed to be progressing smoothly. After that, Ryan brought Nancy over a few more times. Each time, Steve was in high spirits, warmly welcoming her, and sometimes even suggesting she stay overnight. I kept a close watch on Steve. One time, I noticed him subtly touching Nancy when Ryan wasn't looking, taking advantage of his drunken state. While I understood he liked Nancy, such persistent physical contact with his son's partner was completely inappropriate. Nancy, while visibly uncomfortable, handled Steve skillfully. When I couldn't bear to watch any longer, I would step in and sit firmly between them.
Get out of here, old lady.
Each time, Steve would yell at me, but I didn't care about his outbursts as long as I was protecting Nancy, Ryan's important partner. Not long after, on Nancy's 23rd birthday, the two officially registered their marriage. Although they were now a married couple, Ryan's busy work schedule meant they hadn't found a new place to live yet. For the time being, they planned to live primarily at Nancy's apartment. While I felt a little sad about Ryan moving out, I wholeheartedly celebrated their new beginning.
I'll visit often. Oh, and I have a 2-week business trip coming up for training. During that time, Nancy will come by to pick up some of my stuff. Is that okay?
Nancy's apartment wasn't too far from ours, it seemed. I readily agreed to Ryan's request. However, I had a small concern, so I made a suggestion to Ryan. He readily agreed with a smile.
Thanks, Mom.
That simple expression of gratitude from Ryan warmed my heart. If anyone should be grateful, it's me, because I've made it my mission to protect Ryan and his wife, no matter what. 3 months had passed since Ryan and Nancy registered their marriage. At first, they frequently visited us, but lately, they hardly ever came by.
Hey, isn't Ryan or Nancy coming over? If Ryan's busy, just invite Nancy.
Steve said that and tried to get Nancy to come over to the house.
If she doesn't come, I'll go to their place myself.
Sometimes, he even said that and tried to barge into Ryan and Nancy's home. I had to step in and stop him from doing so. Then, Steve made a cryptic remark.
Well, I think Nancy will end up living here eventually.
Even so, when I told him it was inappropriate to meddle too much in a newlywed couple's life, even if it's his son, Steve reluctantly agreed. Knowing he couldn't see Nancy, Steve began going out to the nightlife even more frequently. He still wouldn't work, kept asking for money, and now seemed intent on disrupting Ryan's married life. I found myself wondering why I was even staying with Steve anymore. At first, I liked Steve for his sharp features, his smooth talking, and his kind demeanor. He got along well with Ryan and even said he would work hard for the family. But over time, he had quit his job, continued partying, and become completely unreliable. Even his ginger ale had been replaced by whiskey. The child Steve wanted was one I couldn't give him. Now that Ryan had become independent, I found myself wondering if there was any reason to stay with Steve. Sitting alone in the empty living room, I began to think about the future. Just then, our doorbell rang. It was almost midnight. Thinking Steve had come home, I unlocked the door without checking the monitor. Shortly after, the doorbell at the entrance rang. It was Ryan who had arrived.
Mom, I'm sorry for showing up so late. Is Dad home?
Ryan's face looked unusually tense, almost frightening. When I told him Steve wasn't home yet, Ryan frowned and clicked his tongue. It was the first time I'd seen him behave like this. Did something happen? I led Ryan into the living room and had him sit on the couch. He kept his head down, his face still stern. Sensing his intensity, I was at a loss for words, but Ryan, noticing the atmosphere, finally spoke up.
Mom, I know this might be hard to hear, but I need you to be prepared. Nancy is pregnant.
Even though he told me to prepare myself, I couldn't help but cry out in joy. Pregnant! Congratulations! That's wonderful! I had been nervous about what he might say, but the news of a pregnancy was a welcome surprise. Still, Ryan didn't relax his expression. What he said next would reveal something far more troubling. It was just the other day that they found out Nancy was pregnant. After she complained of feeling unwell, Ryan went with her to the hospital, where they received the news. Ryan was overjoyed and deeply moved when he heard. However, he noticed that Nancy's expression remained dark. Thinking it was due to her physical condition, he had her rest at home, but that night, something terrible happened. In the middle of the night, Ryan was startled awake by noises and loud voices. When he checked the house, he found Nancy in the kitchen, holding a knife and crying hysterically. Ryan hurriedly took the knife from her and calmed her down, guiding her gently to the couch. Nancy cried uncontrollably until past 3 a.m., before finally calming down. He let her sleep that night, and since the next day was a holiday, Ryan stayed by her side all day.
I knew there had to be a big reason behind Nancy's actions. I kept telling her over and over that no matter what she said, I'd be on her side. Eventually, she opened up to me.
And then Ryan told me what she had shared with him. It was shocking. The horrifying details made my legs tremble, my jaw quiver, and left me utterly speechless. I could feel Ryan's boundless anger radiating from him. It wasn't sadness or frustration. It was a fierce, burning rage. Ryan clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. In the heavy silence, my phone suddenly rang. It was Steve. When Ryan saw who it was, he pressed the answer button and switched to speaker.
Hey, Olivia. You're still up. I'm not coming home tonight. Oh, and I've got plans tomorrow too. So make sure to leave some cash before you head to work. Thanks.
Steve's drunken, cheerful voice came through the phone. Hearing Steve's voice seemed to drain the fury from Ryan's face, leaving behind a cold, emotionless expression.
Hey, Dad. Out drinking again tonight, right?
Ryan's usual gentle tone, strangely calm, felt terrifying.
Ryan? Oh, you're there. Is Nancy with you? If she's coming over, I should have stayed home.
Ryan furrowed his brow at Steve's words.
Dad, Nancy's at her parents' house right now. By the way, she's pregnant.
Ryan quietly dropped the news. I clasped my hands together in silent prayer and listened intently for what would come next.
Really? That's great news. So, she's pregnant. That's wonderful.
I could see Ryan's fists clenching tighter and tighter at Steve's response. Though silent, his fists trembled violently.
You don't seem surprised. Almost like you already knew Nancy was pregnant. Hey, Dad, you have an idea why, don't you?
I thought it would be too cruel to let Ryan say anything more, but I was already a mess, tears streaming down my face, unable to say a word to Steve. Hearing Ryan's words, Steve let out a smug chuckle and began speaking without a hint of remorse.
Well, it's your fault for talking about moving out and cutting me off financially. And seriously, landing someone as gorgeous as Nancy. How lucky can you get? You've always looked down on me, haven't you? But Nancy was kind to me. Honestly, I think she liked me more than she liked you. I don't know why, but married women seem to fall for me.
As Steve's nonsensical and smug words continued, Ryan's anger reached a boiling point.
That's why when you go on business trips and leave Nancy alone, she gets lonely, right? So, I ended up keeping her company. I'm the father of the child she's carrying. Sorry, she came on to me first. Let's raise the child together.
Steve's appalling statement nearly made me pass out.
Are you kidding me?
He looked ready to smash the phone in his hand, and I stopped him with all my strength. What followed was pure chaos. Ryan stood up and kicked the couch. The small items on the nearby shelf were scattered everywhere, and the coffee pot flew off somewhere. He ripped the curtains down, and the metal fittings of the rails scattered everywhere. The vase also tipped over, spilling flowers and water all around. Ryan's eyes were completely unfocused, as if he had lost himself, and there was no clarity in them. I wrapped Ryan's body with a blanket that was nearby. Then I hugged him tightly. Using the same soothing methods I would for a whimpering child, I tried to calm his heart. Eventually, Ryan stopped his rampage, collapsing to his knees and bursting into tears. Steve's call had already ended. Ryan and I cried together for a while. I didn't know how much time had passed. It felt like I had cried until there were no more tears left, using up all the moisture in my body. Ryan, with the same emotionless expression as before, was lost in thought. Then he looked at me and said,
"Mom, should we send him straight to hell?"
Ryan said this and suggested a terrifying plan for revenge. Of course, I would fully cooperate. I nodded without saying a word. Steve, wasting time every day, not working, but only asking for money. How fun is the nightlife? Does the alcohol you drink with money earned by others taste sweet? And does breaking apart the love that others have carefully nurtured for their own selfish desires feel good to you? You used to be someone too good for me, yes, back then. Thank you for being kind to young Ryan. I appreciate it, but it seems like Ryan has long since surpassed your mental maturity. How long do you intend to remain a child? You want kids. Who's going to raise them? Stop wanting children just for your own desires. Kids are lives, not toys. I will protect my precious son, Ryan, and his wife, Nancy. Do you have anything left to protect? Probably just your petty pride, right? If you're busy protecting that, could you just go to hell? I'll never forgive you. Ryan and I are now resolutely heading towards Steve. It's been a month since Steve made that horrific confession, and I haven't returned to our house. Right now, Ryan and I are staying in a hotel in the city. I just couldn't bring myself to face Steve. The thought of that man being my husband makes me sick. No, it's beyond that. I feel nothing but hatred towards Steve. Over the past month, Steve has called me multiple times, but the only thing he wants is money. He hasn't expressed any concern about me not coming home, nor has he apologized to Ryan. Instead, he constantly nags.
Hey, Olivia, enough is enough. I can't go drinking because you haven't given me any money.
It got so loud that, just once, I transferred Steve an amount of money that anyone leading a normal life would be perfectly fine with for about a month. But Steve spent it all in one night. I considered that my responsibility fulfilled and have since ignored any further calls from Steve. Steve is the kind of person who would barge into my workplace if it meant getting money. I couldn't allow him to cause trouble at work, so I explained the situation and resigned. We're living in a hotel now to avoid Steve from coming to our home. Nancy decided to take some time off and stay at her parents' place for a while. For the past month, Ryan and I have been fighting tirelessly to protect what's precious to us. We can't keep crying anymore. There are things we must do to move forward. With the information we've gathered over the past month, Ryan and I have come to face Steve. Today, I told Steve I was coming home, so he'll likely be quietly waiting at the house. He probably thinks he'll get money. As long as Steve can get money, he'll adjust to whatever the situation is. He's a true money-hungry person. I pressed the intercom. It's strange to press the intercom to my own house. But right now, I don't even want to think of this house where Steve lives as mine. I'm sure Ryan feels the same way. When we first got married, I was grateful that Steve accepted both Ryan and me. That's why, even when Steve quit his job and just played around, I thought I should give back the kindness he had shown by serving him. But 6 years have passed, and the grace period is over. And now, Steve has committed a grave mistake. We will never forgive him. I heard the sound of the door being unlocked, so Ryan and I entered the monster's lair. In the living room, Steve was sitting on the couch in his usual going out style.
I'm heading out, so make it quick if you want to talk. And hey, don't forget the money.
While putting a flashy watch on his left wrist, Steve said this with a tune humming under his breath. I could tell he was probably going on a date with a woman, but I felt no jealousy at all. Maybe I'm a strange wife for not feeling that. Ryan remained surprisingly calm when facing Steve, and I was relieved. Before we came here, I had checked Ryan to make sure he wasn't carrying anything dangerous. He told me I was being overly cautious, but the anger Ryan displayed back then was so intense it couldn't be described in words. I thought it was not impossible that Ryan might do something rash when meeting Steve today. Ryan spoke to Steve in a calm voice.
Dad, don't you have anything to say to me?
Steve thought for a moment before responding.
Oh, $1,500 a month will be fine. It's a little tight, but if I get that much pocket money, I can make do. Olivia will pay the rent, and Nancy will do the housework, right? I'll appoint you as my pocket money provider.
I was speechless, unable to close my mouth, as Steve said something I couldn't tell if he was serious or joking. Ryan glared at Steve with an icy expression.
I'm amazed. After what you did to Nancy, you don't even have a word of apology? Of course, even if you apologized, I wouldn't forgive you. But I wanted to see a little bit of sincerity from you.
Ryan said this in a quiet tone, and Steve reacted as if it was nothing.
Why should I apologize? It was your fault for being away on business trips, wasn't it? Nancy came to pick up your stuff, and she complained to me. She said you were boring because you were always working. And she was lonely because you were away on a 2-week business trip. I've told you before, Nancy came on to me first. I just kept her company because she was lonely. If you're angry, you should yell at lazy Nancy instead of me.
As Steve sprayed a strong, suffocating fragrance on his body, he said this. At Steve's words, Ryan stood up. I hurriedly made him sit back down on the couch and tried to calm him down. Ryan, having calmed down a bit, said to Steve,
Don't insult Nancy. She's completely innocent. I know you tricked her and took advantage of her.
Ryan glared at Steve. Steve, with a calm expression, responded,
Tricked her. That sounds bad. If you're going that far, show me the proof. But you don't have any, right?
Steve showed a smug expression. He probably had some kind of confidence in this. In fact, the security camera at the entrance of the room had its power disconnected, and all the footage during the time Ryan was away had been wiped clean. This meant there was no record of Nancy or Steve coming and going. The same was true at the building's management office, where the security camera had also been turned off. The building manager said there might have been a temporary power outage, but it was odd for the security camera alone to be without power for such a long time. We were certain this was a deliberate act by Steve. So foolish, such a naive way of thinking. It would be troublesome if Steve felt victorious just from shutting off the security cameras.
If you're going to say that, I'll show you the proof you want.
Ryan stared directly at Steve's face and launched an app on his smartphone. It was an app for playing audio recordings. This app allowed audio recorded on devices like voice recorders to be transferred to and used on the phone. Ryan, with determination, pressed play. The audio started with a conversation between Nancy and Steve when Nancy came to pick up her things from Steve's house. At that point, the recording ended with Steve saying, "See you," and it was clear Nancy had left the house. But the real issue came afterward. There was the sound of a door slamming shut. It was likely when Nancy returned home. Immediately after that, another loud slam was heard. From Nancy's scream, it was apparent someone had opened the door.
What's wrong? How did you find this place? Did you follow me?
Nancy's frightened voice could be heard.
Don't make it sound like I was following you. I came because I forgot to tell you something. Did you know? Ryan actually has a huge debt. I've been covering it for him, but he hasn't paid me back at all. Can't you talk to him and do something about it?
At Steve's words, I couldn't help but glance at Ryan's face. Ryan shook his head, looking dismayed.
Debt? I don't know anything about that.
Nancy's voice trembled. Steve twisted his face as he listened to the recording.
I really need to get that money back soon. If Ryan can't pay it back with money, I'll need you to help me out.
Ryan stopped the playback at that point. I also checked, but after that, the audio was unbearable to listen to. It was Steve threatening Nancy to pay him back, and if she couldn't, he was coercing her to pay with her body. Of course, the fact that Ryan had any debt was a complete lie. This was a baseless lie from Steve.
I gave Nancy a voice recorder because I was worried something might happen while I was on my business trip. I told her to start recording as soon as she woke up and keep it in her pocket. It was the right call. Sure enough, you did something horrible to Nancy.
This was something I had advised Ryan about before. I had shared my concerns with Ryan about Steve's behavior toward Nancy. As a precaution, Ryan must have had Nancy carry the voice recorder.
That's not enough proof. You know you can even manipulate the audio now, right? You can easily fake that kind of sound. Without video, it's useless as evidence.
Steve was clearly shaken, but he still had enough energy to argue. Ryan sighed and continued.
Sorry, but there is video. While I was on my business trip, Nancy sent me daily video messages. They were pretty long, so I recorded them on my computer. She was working on her computer before she went to pick up her things that day. Then, you barged into Nancy's house. Guess what? It was all clearly recorded. The computer's built-in camera captured everything that happened in the room.
As Ryan said this, tears started flowing from his eyes. It must have been difficult for Ryan to review such painful footage of Nancy. But despite this, Ryan fought to protect Nancy and prove her innocence.
This is no joke. What the hell? Delete that video and audio right now. What are you trying to do? Blackmail me? What's your goal here? It's your fault you're not giving us any money. What's the problem? It's a good thing. A new family member is coming. Shouldn't you be happy about that?
Steve's selfish words made Ryan slam his fist onto the table.
Blackmail? You're the one who tricked and blackmailed Nancy. You took advantage of her while I wasn't around, and that's nothing but cowardly and despicable. It's the lowest, most horrible act possible.
Ryan's intense anger was enough to make even Steve flinch.
I'm suing you for damages.
Steve reacted strongly to that.
What are you talking about? There's no way I can pay you damages.
Steve countered with a half smile. At this point, his defiance no longer stirred any emotions in me. I had passed the point of anger. Ryan remained calm and spoke to Steve.
If you can't pay, then you should go to jail.
Steve's actions were nothing less than a great crime. Neither Ryan nor I had any intention of forgiving him. Whether it's damages or prison, I just want him to suffer.
You're planning to send your father to jail? Even though we're not blood related, I'm your mother's husband, you know? If you do something so unfilial, Olivia will be heartbroken. Are you really okay with that?
Steve, now using the word father, was completely frustrating. I decided to deliver the reality to Steve on Ryan's behalf. Steve, thanks for your concern. You're no longer Ryan's father, so don't worry. I'll be divorcing you, but I know you won't agree easily, so let's talk through a lawyer. Oh, and by the way, I'll be demanding damages from you, so look forward to it. Steve seemed like he wanted to say something, but he just opened and closed his mouth, unable to speak. You've been involved with so many women, haven't you? I had it checked out. If you want proof, just ask. I've got plenty of photos from the scenes. Some of them were even married women. Looks like you weren't lying when you said you're popular with married women. I'm sure the husbands of those women will also be suing you for damages. Good luck with that. I felt a deep pain in my heart, thinking that if I had divorced Steve sooner, Nancy and Ryan wouldn't have been hurt. That's why I'm making sure to bring justice to Steve here. The lawsuit with Steve will no doubt bring me some hardship as well. But it's also a reminder to myself, so I'm ready to face it.
By the way, this is a side note. Nancy's family is from a pretty traditional background, you know. They've been guarding that land for generations. Nancy's father was the 8th generation gentleman. He's planning to come and greet you because of this matter.
At Ryan's words, Steve's face turned pale. It's likely that they're involved in some sort of organized crime. I'm looking forward to the visit.
Are you really going to abandon me, Olivia? If Nancy has a child, it's my child, you know? Why don't we just stay together and raise the baby? Since you couldn't have one, let's raise Nancy's child together, okay?
Steve's words were as selfish as ever. He had no idea how selfish his words were. I had planned to keep the truth from him as a final act of mercy, but Ryan and I felt Steve should know the truth. Ryan, after exchanging a glance with me, nodded and spoke to Steve in a calm voice.
Sorry, but the child in Nancy's womb is not yours. It's mine. We had the weeks checked and calculated at the hospital. And considering everything, it's my child.
Ryan's quiet yet powerful words left Steve unable to respond. I added my own comment. I didn't tell you before, but remember when we did fertility treatments together? You probably had a lot of tests, and the cause of the infertility was actually your male infertility. You had no viable cells, that's the truth. Steve's face filled with the greatest despair I'd seen all day. He had no money, he was losing his family, and now he was on the verge of losing his dignity as a man. The tiny pride Steve had protected was blown away in an instant. Tears started to fall from Steve's eyes as he crumpled to his knees. I felt no sympathy. I don't know what will happen to Steve from now on. But since we are no longer married, it's none of my concern. It's the consequences of his own actions. He should have stuck with his ginger ale and not bothered with alcohol. Now I'm living near Ryan and Nancy's new place. I don't go in and out frequently, as that would be inappropriate, but I enter and leave as needed. My main role is to help Nancy, who is pregnant, but she has been actively engaging in housework and exercise without being lazy, even during her pregnancy. There are times when her health isn't great, so I step in to prepare meals or clean when needed. My relationship with Nancy is good, and we've become close enough that Ryan gets a little jealous sometimes.
Not sure where he got it from, but Dad's alimony payment came through all at once.
After Nancy fell asleep, Ryan told me in the living room. He had probably gone to his own family to beg for the money. It turns out Steve was raised like a spoiled child in a strict household. He'd been kicked out of his family home for a while due to his reckless behavior. Ryan and I would have preferred he face the full consequences of his actions, but Nancy refused.
He should suffer in the outside world.
It was a resolute opinion, fitting for the daughter of the 8th generation. Being exposed to public scrutiny and living with the feeling of shame is a form of punishment in itself. Making his own money, paying back what he owes, and atoning for his sins.
He has nothing left to escape.
When Nancy said this with such calm grace, it surprised both Ryan and me. Ryan is doing well at work, and we're both eagerly awaiting the birth of their child. Ryan buys baby clothes and toys every day, and Nancy has been complaining that the house is getting cramped. I finalized my divorce with Steve through mediation. I'm planning to visit Ryan's father's grave this weekend to report everything. On a beautiful sunny day, Nancy gave birth in the warm sunlight. The healthy baby girl they had was starting to resemble Ryan in some way. I've gained something else I want to protect. The tiny hand of the baby grasped my finger tightly.